It is the Martha Zoller Show. We're going to be talking more about that as we know more information. But first, we're talking to Brent Buchanan from Cygnal about a poll that was came out after the Apalachee shooting that his company did. And of course, as you know, Apalachee High School is in our listing area. And happily, they are back in band competitions. And it looks like they may be back to school next week, as well as trying to get back to some kind of normalcy in the life that they have as a school. Brent, thank you so much for being with me today.
Hey, thank you, Martha.
So, what made you decide to poll this, number one, and then number two, what were the basic findings?
Yeah, it's always tough after a tragedy like this to just to separate the consequence of what happened from how do we solve this at the source so it doesn't happen again. And so that was one of the main driving factors of doing this is with the legislative session coming up in a few months. What can elected officials do? What do parents want elected officials to do to address the root causes that lead to tragedies like this?
So, what did you find? What were the things that stuck out to you the most?
Well, the biggest was that parents very much want it to start with consequences for even a threat, because this particular case, this is not the first time that the young man had said anything about this. The FBI had been looking into it for over a year, and 88% of folks said that students who threaten to shoot up a school, quote, shoot up a school, should face consequences. They should be expelled, arrested, maybe even a third of voters said involuntarily commit them to a mental institution. And then even just those threats being made, the same number of parents believe that administrators, principals, and teachers should be informed that a threat was even made. And that 83% of parents want themselves to be informed by the school when a threat is made against the school. And they want to see consequences on the parents who enable or allow this too, like was done in the case of the shooting there in Georgia, the father. So there's just, I don't do a whole lot of polls where 70 or 80% of, upwards of 90% of people agree on anything. We don't really live in a world of 80, 90% agreement anymore. But the parents in Georgia are very much in lockstep on wanting to see this addressed at the time a threat is made, not just after a tragedy happens.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And I think what's such a challenge is that I was talking to a Democratic state legislator yesterday, and I made the point to her. I said, even if everything you've proposed had been in place, in this particular case, the parent wouldn't have risen to the level that they would have had no guns. They may have been a bad parent. They may have been, but they hadn't risen to the level of a criminal record where they would have had no guns. And a 14-year-old shouldn't have access to guns, period. So, there is that challenge of even if you put laws in place, if there's family breakdown, which clearly there was in this case, how do you deal with that? And that's why I think the informational part that showed up so prominently in your poll, that parents just want to know. I think the biggest shock of this whole thing was that the FBI had interviewed this guy a year ago. And why wasn't some kind of help? And it does seem like his other parent that was not living in the home was trying to get help for this young man. I mean, there were just a lot of breakdowns in this case.
Well, and we even asked voters if they think this stems from not this particular case, but just school shootings in general. They stem from a lack of mental resources or are firearms to blame. And only a third of parents in Georgia said firearms are to blame, and over half said it's lack of mental health resources.
Yes.
I think you're spot on. And what is the root cause of this? It's not that there's a threat; it's that there's something that led up to that threat. And so when we said, well, what solutions would you support? 71% of parents said increasing mental health services, 69% consequences for threatening students like we were talking about, 65% training school resource officers, another 65% controlling access points. So that there are things to do at the different steps of what leads to a tragedy like this. But the overwhelming response from Georgia parents is, don't just do something, do a lot and address each of the steps.
Yeah, I mean, we have in our school system here in Hall County, where I'm based out of, for the last couple of years, they've been doing a training for not only students for anger management kind of things, but all the way up to the janitor, to the employee, anybody in the school system, and they have been able to drastically reduce conflict between people in the school system since they've been doing this program, because as the superintendent says, is that we know who these school shooters are. These school shooters are a student, a faculty member, a relative. There's somebody that has interacted with the school in some way. They're not just somebody walking in off the street that has no connection to the school. And that's why I think you're seeing in this poll, and what I found so interesting in this poll, is this kind of multi-pronged approach that parents want.
Definitely. Well, we could talk about societal problems that have led us to
I know.
it too, but I didn't cover that in the poll.
No, I know you didn't. And as you mentioned in your bio, you have no free time because you have 5 children. So
I do, and they go to public school.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So listen, do you think this is an issue that will have legs in a few weeks as people go to vote, or do you think this is more of an issue that people will think about in their own local communities?
Voters are a lot smarter than I think pundits and some politicians give them credit for. And, we saw this when I was the pollster for Governor Kemp in his election. Like they realize who can address crime, who can address inflation, who can address school safety, who can address violence, who can address name the issue. And I don't think you're going to see anything at the federal level of an impact from this. But I do think you're going to see some pressure from voters saying to state legislative candidates, like, you got to do something about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, and I hope I'm not coming out of left field here, is that, of course, we have a presidential election in, 48 days, whatever the number of days is. And it's something like, I think we've had 10 years of political news in the last 3 months. And, and I always say to my friends, if you say you know what's going to happen, you don't. I mean, it's a very fluid kind of situation. But as far as Kamala Harris goes, 3-4 months ago, the New York Times was saying how hard she was to work for, and she was a drag on the ticket, and, all of this kind of stuff. And then there's been this transformation that, like, I've never seen before, of a candidate now becoming popular. But when you dig into the polling that I've seen, she's not doing as well as Joe Biden and many of the core groups that Democrats need to win. And then, President Trump, of course, has had this 2 assassination attempts, and I think he had a very good rally yesterday, and he did a very calm kind of presentation there. But what are your thoughts, and what is the polling you're doing showing kind of where we are today as far as the presidential race goes?
Well, the AJC poll that came out, what was that, yesterday, I think is pretty spot on in the challenge that Kamala Harris has in flipping the Sun Belt states. There was a poll maybe a week or 2 ago that came out in Arizona from a friend of mine, a very respected polling firm. And if you look at some of the key demographics in that poll, like younger voters of color, she definitely fixed some of the issues that Biden had with those voters. But I'll give you 2 numbers that really stuck out to me. In 2020 in Arizona, Biden won younger voters by 33 points over Trump. And in my friend's poll, she was only winning those voters by 11 points. So you can start to see a delta among some key groups that she definitely did better than Biden with, but she's not doing well enough to say win Arizona as an example. And then if we swap over to Pennsylvania, which I think is the linchpin of the election, the Teamsters yesterday released data that their membership when Biden was the candidate, that he was the preferred candidate of the Teamsters members, 12 million strong union. And then when they surveyed between Harris and Trump, Trump was up over 30 points, almost 30 points among the membership on Harris. And so I think that's indicative of this white working class voter in these Midwestern Rust Belt type states that Biden actually would have done better with than she has. Now, has she invigorated younger voters and voters of color in Philadelphia? Yes, 100%. But there's more white working class voters in Pennsylvania. It's the whitest working class state in the country. And so I think she has some inherent challenges that Teamster data kind of bears out.
Well, I tell you, it's so interesting, but I still am of the mind that this is Trump's election to lose. I think that the economy is the biggest issue, as well as immigration, and I just really want people. I want whatever the result to be, for it to be a result of a lot of people going out to vote, and there being confidence in what the result is. And so that's what I'm looking for.
I agree. And it does. A very close election is not good for America in where we find ourselves right now.
I appreciate it very much. If people want to know more about the work you're doing, how can they find out?
Well, hop online and go to Cygnal. That's cygn.al. So it's our company name with just a dot between the N and the AL. And we've got national poll. We just released a congressional battleground poll this week, looking at the top 39 congressional seats, and we'll be in the field in a couple of weeks with another national poll for folks.
Absolutely. Brent Buchanan, thank you so much for being with me today.
Hey, my pleasure.